Chapter 1: The Ordinary Life. It was a day like any other in the small town of Pinewood, a place where nothing ever seemed to change. Nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, Pinewood was the sort of town that tourists passed through without a second glance. The air was crisp, the streets clean, and the people friendly, perhaps a little too friendly. They would greet each other with wide smiles, always knowing what everyone else was up to, and nothing was ever out of place. At least, that's how it seemed. In the heart of Pinewood lived Owen Miller, an unremarkable man by all accounts. He was in his late 20s, with unruly brown hair that never quite sat right and eyes that seemed to reflect the dullness of his surroundings. He worked at the local post office, sorting letters and packages, and had done so for the past 6 years. Owen was the kind of person who blended into the background, perfectly content with the monotony of his life, or so he thought. That morning, as Owen walked to work, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sun shone brightly, as it always did, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The birds chirped cheerfully, the same melody they sang every morning. Yet, there was an unusual stillness in the air, a sense that the world was holding its breath. As he reached the post office, he noticed Mrs. Thompson, the town's elderly librarian, struggling with a stack of books. Owen, ever the helpful neighbor, rushed over to assist. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Thompson said with a warm smile. "You're such a kind soul, always helping out." "It's nothing, really," Owen replied, returning her smile. "Just another day in Pinewood." But as he handed the last book to her, something odd happened. The book slipped from his grasp and fell open on the ground, revealing a page filled with strange symbols, nothing like the neat, orderly letters Owen was accustomed to. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered for a brief moment, her eyes widening as she quickly closed the book. "Old languages," she muttered, almost to herself. "Sometimes they just pop up in the oddest places." Owen nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. But before he could ask more, Mrs. Thompson had already gathered her books and was scurrying away, leaving Owen standing there, puzzled. The day continued as usual, or as usual as it could in Pinewood. Owen sorted the mail, exchanged pleasantries with his coworkers, and filed away the nagging thought about Mrs. Thompson's book. It wasn't until his lunch break that the strangeness began to settle in again. Sitting at his usual spot in the park, Owen unwrapped his sandwich, only to find it wasn't what he'd packed that morning. Instead of the familiar turkey and cheese, there was a peanut butter and pickle sandwich staring back at him. Owen frowned. He didn't even like peanut butter. Glancing around, he spotted a note tucked beneath the sandwich wrapper. It was written in the same strange symbols he had seen in Mrs. Thompson's book. Owen laughed it off, assuming it was some sort of prank. "Very funny," he said aloud, hoping someone nearby would own up to it. But the park was empty, save for a few squirrels scampering about. He decided to head back to work early, leaving the strange sandwich behind. As he walked, he tried to shake off the growing unease. After all, Pinewood was a town where nothing unusual ever happened. But as he turned the corner onto Main Street, he spotted something that made him stop in his tracks. There, in the middle of the road, was a cow. Not just any cow, but a bright purple one, calmly chewing on a patch of grass. The absurdity of it made Owen burst out laughing. "Now I've seen everything," he muttered. But when he blinked, the cow was gone. Just like that, the street was as empty and ordinary as it had always been. Owen shook his head, convinced that he must have been imagining things. After all, what was more ordinary than a small town where nothing ever happened? But as he continued on his way, a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind told him that perhaps, just perhaps, everything was about to change. Chapter 2: The Unforgettable Dream. Owen had never been one to pay much attention to his dreams. To him, they were just fragments of imagination, fleeting images that dissipated with the morning light. But the dream that night was different, so vivid, so real, it lingered in his mind like a stubborn fog. He found himself standing in the middle of a vast, barren landscape. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry, stretching out endlessly in every direction. The sky above was a deep, swirling mass of dark clouds, tinged with a strange, otherworldly glow. There was no sun, no moon, just a strange, pulsating light that seemed to emanate from the clouds themselves. In the distance, Owen could see a towering structure, its edges sharp and jagged, like the remnants of a forgotten civilization. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the light above. He felt drawn to the structure, as if an invisible force was pulling him toward it. As he walked, the ground beneath him shifted, the cracks widening into deep chasms. He stumbled, almost losing his footing, but somehow managed to keep going. The closer he got to the structure, the more the air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. It was as if the very fabric of reality was warping around him. When he finally reached the structure, he saw that it was covered in the same strange symbols he had seen in Mrs. Thompson's book. The symbols glowed with an unnatural light, pulsating in time with the rhythm of the clouds above. Owen reached out to touch one of them, his fingers hovering just inches away. Suddenly, the symbols began to rearrange themselves, shifting and changing before his eyes. They formed a pattern, one that Owen couldn't quite comprehend, but felt was of immense importance. A low, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it became almost deafening. And then, he saw it, the mark. It appeared on his hand, as if it had always been there, a perfect match to the symbols on the structure. The moment his eyes fell on it, the ground beneath him gave way, and Owen felt himself plummeting into darkness. He woke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. His room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the curtains. For a moment, he lay there, trying to calm his racing mind, but the images from the dream refused to fade. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. The details of the dream were still so clear, so sharp, as if they had been etched into his memory. And then he noticed it, the mark. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at his hand, where the same strange symbol from his dream was now imprinted on his skin. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there. Owen rubbed at it, hoping it was just some trick of the light, but the mark remained stubbornly in place. He couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening to him, something beyond his understanding. He got out of bed and paced the room, his mind racing. The dream, the mark, the symbols, none of it made any sense. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just some random dream. It was a message, a warning, perhaps even a call to action. But from whom? And for what purpose? Owen's thoughts drifted back to the events of the day, the strange book, the note, the purple cow. They were all connected, pieces of a puzzle he had only just begun to uncover. But how did it all fit together? What was the dream trying to tell him? He knew he couldn't ignore this, no matter how much he wanted to. Whatever was happening, it was real, and it was happening to him. The ordinary life he had known was slipping away, replaced by something far more mysterious and unsettling. As he stood by the window, staring out into the night, Owen felt a mix of fear and excitement bubbling up inside him. The dream had opened a door, and there was no turning back now. Something was coming, something big, and Owen was right in the middle of it. With a deep breath, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start looking for answers. He didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. Chapter 3: The Mysterious Mark. The morning light seeped through Owen's curtains, casting a pale glow across the room. He hadn't slept much after the dream, his mind too preoccupied with the mark that now adorned his hand. As he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the faint symbol, a sense of unease settled over him. The mark felt alien, yet strangely familiar, as if it had always been a part of him, lying dormant until now. He ran his fingers over the mark again, hoping against hope that it would disappear, but it remained stubbornly etched into his skin. The symbol was intricate, made up of interlocking lines and curves that seemed to shimmer slightly under the light. It was almost hypnotic, drawing his gaze again and again. Owen shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He needed answers, but where could he possibly start? The dream had left him with more questions than ever, and the mark felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something unknown. He decided to begin with Mrs. Thompson. The old librarian was the only person he could think of who might know something about the strange symbols. After all, she had recognized them in her book, hadn't she? Perhaps she could shed some light on this bizarre situation. Throwing on his clothes, Owen hurried out of his apartment, barely stopping to lock the door behind him. The streets of Pinewood were just beginning to stir with life, the usual quiet morning routine unfolding. But to Owen, everything felt different, tinged with an underlying sense of foreboding. The library was a small, quaint building on the edge of town, surrounded by towering oak trees that seemed to guard it from the outside world. As Owen approached, he noticed a peculiar stillness in the air, a sharp contrast to the usual morning bustle. The doors were slightly ajar, which struck him as odd. Mrs. Thompson was always meticulous about keeping them shut. Pushing the door open, Owen stepped inside, the familiar scent of old books and polished wood greeting him. The library was quiet to quiet. The usual creaking of the floorboards and the rustle of pages were absent, replaced by an almost oppressive silence. "Mrs. Thompson?" Owen called out, his voice echoing eerily through the empty space. There was no response. Owen frowned, making his way deeper into the library. The dim light filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows across the rows of bookshelves, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. He reached the main desk, but there was no sign of Mrs. Thompson. Only her reading glasses lay on the counter, forgotten. A chill ran down Owen's spine. Something was definitely wrong. He was about to turn and leave when a glint of light caught his eye. Tucked between two thick volumes on the desk was a small, metallic object. Owen hesitated for a moment before reaching for it, his fingers brushing against cold metal. It was a key, an old, ornate key with strange symbols engraved. Along its shaft, the same symbols that marked his hand. His heart began to race as he turned the key over in his palm, trying to make sense of what he was holding. Why would Mrs. Thompson have this? And why was it left out for him to find? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of creaking floorboards behind him. Owen spun around, but there was no one there. The library was still as empty as it had been when he arrived. He scanned the room, half expecting Mrs. Thompson to appear from behind a bookshelf, but the library remained eerily silent. Clutching the key tightly, Owen began to search the library, his earlier hesitation replaced by a growing sense of determination. He felt as though he was being led by an invisible hand, drawn deeper into the labyrinth of bookshelves. His eyes darted from shelf to shelf, searching for anything out of the ordinary, but everything seemed as it should be. Just as he was about to give up, something caught his attention: a narrow, almost hidden staircase at the far end of the library, partially obscured by a heavy curtain. Owen was certain that he had never seen it before, and yet there it was, beckoning him forward. With a deep breath, Owen ascended the staircase, each step creaking under his weight. The stairs led to a small, dusty attic room, lit only by a single, grimy window. The room was cluttered with old books, maps, and what looked like ancient artifacts, all covered in a thick layer of dust. In the center of the room stood an old wooden chest, its surface worn and scarred by time. The chest bore the same symbols as the key and his mark, and Owen's hand trembled as he inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, and the lid creaked open. Inside was a single book, bound in dark leather, its cover adorned with more of the strange symbols. The pages, yellowed with age, were filled with handwritten notes and diagrams that made no immediate sense to Owen, but as he flipped through the pages, he noticed something that sent a shiver down his spine. There, amidst the cryptic writings, was a sketch of the mark on his hand, drawn with painstaking detail. Beneath it were words written in a language he couldn't understand, but the urgency of their meaning was unmistakable. Owen stared at the book, his mind racing. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than he had imagined, and he was at the center of it all. The key, the mark, the dream, they were all connected, and they were leading him somewhere. But to what and why? Owen knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The ordinary life he had once known was slipping further away, replaced by a mystery that was growing darker and more complex with every passing moment. Chapter 4. The quest begins. Owen sat in the musty attic, staring at the ancient book in his lap. The room felt heavy, as if the weight of centuries was pressing down on him. His head spun with questions. What did the symbols mean? Who had drawn the mark on his hand? And why on earth had Mrs. Thompson left him a key to this mysterious chest? But as the minutes ticked by, another thought pushed its way to the forefront of Owen's mind, a thought so simple, yet so overwhelming. What was he supposed to do now? The sheer absurdity of the situation hit him all at once, and before he knew it, a chuckle escaped his lips. Right, he muttered to himself. Just a typical Tuesday, waking up with a weird tattoo, finding a hidden key, and discovering an ancient book in the attic of the town library. Completely normal. He stood up, pacing the cramped space. The old floorboards creaked in protest under his weight, and a cloud of dust rose around his feet, making him cough. Great, he said, wiping his eyes. Just what I needed, dusty lungs to go with my brand new mystical mark. Owen tried to piece together everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. It was all too bizarre. For most of his life, he'd gone out of his way to avoid anything remotely unusual. He liked his routine. Wake up, go to work, eat lunch at the park, go home, and repeat. But now, it was as if the universe had taken his quiet, predictable life and tossed it into a blender. Maybe I should just go back to bed, Owen mused, half seriously. Pretend none of this ever happened. Wake up tomorrow and everything will be normal again. But he knew that wasn't going to work. The mark on his hand throbbed gently, as if reminding him that he had already crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. Reluctantly, he opened the book again, flipping through the pages with a mix of curiosity and dread. The handwriting was old-fashioned and spidery, and the symbols continued to mock him with their cryptic allure. Owen wished he had paid more attention in school, or at least taken a course in ancient languages instead of that pottery class. What was he thinking? He sighed, closing the book with a thud. Okay, Owen, he muttered. You've got a mysterious mark on your hand, a key that opens a spooky chest, and a book you can't read. What now? His stomach growled in response. Owen's eyes darted to his watch, and he realized he hadn't eaten since breakfast. Right, he said, grinning despite himself. First things first. Food. Then I'll figure out how to save the world or whatever it is I'm supposed to do. He slipped the book into his backpack and made his way down the narrow staircase. As he reached the bottom, he hesitated, glancing around the empty library. The place felt even more deserted than when he'd first arrived. Mrs. Thompson? He called out again, hoping she might magically appear and explain everything. But the only response was the distant creak of a floorboard. Figures, Owen muttered, shaking his head. Mystical libraries don't come with helpful librarians when you actually need them. He stepped outside into the bright sunlight, blinking as his eyes adjusted. Pinewood looked just as ordinary as it always did, but now it felt different, like a stage set, hiding something beneath the surface. Owen couldn't help but chuckle at the thought. Maybe the whole town's in on it, he mused, like some kind of elaborate prank. Any minute now, someone's going to jump out and shout, "Gotcha." The idea was comforting, but deep down, Owen knew it wasn't true. Whatever was happening, it was real, and it was up to him to figure it out. But before he could do any world-saving, he needed a sandwich, preferably one that wasn't made of peanut butter and pickles. As he walked down the street toward the deli, he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. Every shadow, every passerby seemed to carry a hidden meaning, as if the town itself was holding its breath. When Owen reached the deli, he ordered his usual turkey and cheese, no mustard, and sat down at a corner table. As he unwrapped his sandwich, he caught a glimpse of the mark on his hand again. It was still there, of course, mocking him with its mystery. I'm starting to think I need a vacation, he muttered to himself, taking a bite. Maybe somewhere sunny and normal where the only thing I have to worry about is sunscreen. But even as he tried to focus on his meal, his mind kept drifting back to the book, the symbols, and the strange series of events that had led him here. He felt like he was on the verge of something big, something that could change his life forever. And as much as he hated to admit it, part of him was excited. Sure, it was terrifying, confusing, and completely out of his comfort zone, but it was also kind of thrilling, like being the main character in one of those adventure novels he'd read as a kid. Finishing his sandwich, Owen wiped his hands and pulled out the book once more. He flipped through the pages, determined to make some sense of it, but it was no use. The symbols were as inscrutable as ever. Maybe I need a decoder ring, he joked to himself, or a magnifying glass. Sherlock Holmes always had one of those. But before he could dive too deeply into his amateur detective fantasy, the door of the deli swung open and someone walked in. Owen didn't look up at first, too engrossed in his thoughts, but then he heard a familiar voice. Well, if it isn't Owen Miller, the town's most elusive bachelor. Owen looked up, startled, to see Tom, his old friend from high school, grinning at him from across the room. Tom was the kind of guy who always seemed to be in a good mood, with a knack for finding humor in any situation. Hey Tom, Owen replied, forcing a smile. What brings you here? Tom shrugged, grabbing a chair and sitting down across from Owen. Just grabbing lunch. You look like you've seen a ghost, man. Everything all right? Owen hesitated, unsure how to explain the whirlwind of events that had appended his life in the past day. Yeah, just weird dreams, you know? Tom raised an eyebrow. Weird dreams, huh? Well, as long as they're not about giant purple cows or something. Owen laughed despite himself. Actually, funny you should mention that. Tom stared at him, his grin widening. Wait, you're serious? A purple cow? Man, you need to lay off the late-night snacks. Owen shook his head, smiling for the first time since the whole thing began. Yeah, maybe I do. As Tom launched into a story about his latest dating disaster, Owen found himself relaxing, grateful for the brief reprieve from the mystery that had consumed his thoughts. But even as he laughed along with his friend, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. There was a journey ahead, one he was far from prepared for. But for now, Owen decided to enjoy the moment. The world could wait just a little while longer. Chapter 5. The Forgotten City. Owen couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him was holding its breath, even as Tom regaled him with tales of disastrous dates and office pranks. The mark on his hand tingled, a constant reminder that his ordinary life had taken an extraordinary turn. The next day, with the mysterious book still tucked safely in his backpack, Owen set off on what felt like the most peculiar errand of his life. The symbols, the key, and that strange dream, it all pointed to something bigger, something waiting for him just beyond the edges of his understanding. He knew he needed to get away from Pinewood, away from the mundane, if he was going to figure it out. The forest on the outskirts of town had always been a place of solace for Owen, a quiet refuge where he could escape the noise of daily life. But today, as he walked deeper into the woods, it felt different. The trees, usually so familiar, loomed larger, their branches twisting into eerie shapes that seemed to whisper secrets to one another. The path underfoot, which had always led him to his favorite spot by the river, now seemed to twist and turn of its own accord. Great, Owen muttered to himself, swatting at a low-hanging branch. Now even the trees are in on it. Despite the strange feeling gnawing at him, Owen pressed on. The further he walked, the more the landscape began to change. The well-trodden dirt path gradually gave way to an even, rocky terrain, and the lush greenery thinned out, replaced by twisted, gnarled trees that looked like they had been there for centuries. It wasn't long before he found himself standing at the edge of a steep ravine, the air around him growing noticeably cooler. He paused, glancing around. This wasn't part of the forest he'd ever explored before. The ravine stretched out before him, narrow and deep, with crumbling stone walls that seemed to beckon him forward. Owen's heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. Something was down there, he could feel it in his bones. It was as if the very earth was calling to him, urging him to take the leap. With a deep breath, Owen began his descent, carefully navigating the jagged rocks. The climb was treacherous, but the further down he went, the stronger the pull became, guiding him as if some unseen force was leading the way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the bottom. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Hidden deep within the ravine was an ancient, forgotten city. Its stone structures half buried in the earth. Vines and moss had reclaimed much of it, but the intricate carvings and statues that adorned the buildings were still visible, telling tales of a long-lost civilization. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like the smell of old coins. Owen walked through the deserted streets, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The city was eerily silent, as if it had been frozen in time, waiting for someone to find it. And yet, there was something almost comforting about it, like a memory that had been buried deep in his mind, now slowly resurfacing. As he wandered, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned a corner and found himself standing before a massive, crumbling temple. Its entrance was adorned with more of the strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light that filtered down from above. Owen's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the place he had seen in his dream, the place where the answers lay hidden. He reached out to touch one of the symbols, and as his fingers brushed against the cool stone, the mark on his hand flared with light. The temple door creaked open, revealing a dark, yawning entrance. Steeling himself, Owen stepped inside, leaving the daylight behind. The air was heavy with the scent of ancient stone and mystery, and as he ventured deeper into the temple, Owen couldn't help but feel that he was about to uncover a secret that had been waiting for him for centuries. What lay ahead, he had no idea, but whatever it was, it would change everything. Chapter 6: The Ancient Prophecy. The temple's interior was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors and cavernous halls, each more imposing than the last. Owen's footsteps echoed ominously off the stone walls, the sound swallowed by the thick, musty air. The faint light from the entrance quickly faded as he moved deeper inside, leaving him with only the glow from his phone to guide the way. He ran his fingers along the walls as he walked, feeling the rough stone beneath his fingertips. Every so often, he'd encounter more of the mysterious symbols carved into the walls, their patterns growing increasingly complex and ornate the further he went. It was as if the temple itself was alive, its stories etched into its very bones, waiting for someone to decipher them. Owen turned a corner and found himself in a vast chamber. The ceiling soared high above, lost in darkness, and the walls were lined with towering columns, each one adorned with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of battle, celebration, and ritual. At the far end of the chamber, an enormous statue of a robed figure loomed over him, its stone face shrouded in shadow. His eyes were drawn to a massive, stone tablet, set into the floor at the base of the statue. The surface of the tablet was covered in rows of symbols, arranged in neat, orderly lines. This was no ordinary inscription. There was an intentionality to the way the symbols were laid out, almost as if they were telling a story. With a mixture of trepidation and curiosity, Owen knelt beside the tablet and began to study the symbols. The glowing mark on his hand seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, urging him to continue. He wasn't sure how, but as he traced the symbols with his eyes, he began to understand them. It was as if the knowledge was being fed directly into his mind, the ancient language unlocking itself piece by piece. The tablet told the tale of an ancient civilization that had thrived in these lands, long before history as he knew it had begun. They were a people of great wisdom and power, who had harnessed the forces of nature to build their empire, but their prosperity had come at a cost, one that would eventually lead to their downfall. According to the inscription, the civilization had been guided by a prophecy, one that spoke of a chosen individual who would one day rise to either save or doom the world. This chosen one would be marked by the symbols of the old gods, bearing a sign that would appear on their skin when the time was right. They would be drawn to the forgotten city, where they would unlock the secrets of the past and decide the fate of the future. As Owen read on, a sense of unease settled over him. The prophecy was vague in many ways, leaving much open to interpretation, but one thing was clear: the chosen one would face a series of trials, each more daunting than the last, and the outcome would determine whether the world would be reborn or plunged into darkness. The realization hit Owen like a tidal wave. The mark on his hand, the dreams, the strange pull he'd felt toward this place, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. He was the chosen one the prophecy spoke of. He was the one destined to face the trials and decide the future of the world. No pressure, right? Owen muttered, running a hand through his hair as he stood up. Just your average guy, picked to either save the world or destroy it. Great, just great. He glanced around the chamber, half expecting some ancient priest or ghostly figure to materialize and offer him guidance. But of course, there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the temple, the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Owen paced in front of the tablet, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do next? He had no idea how to save the world. He could barely manage his own life, let alone the fate of humanity. And what were these trials he was supposed to face? The inscription hadn't exactly provided a helpful list of instructions. I could really use a manual right about now, Owen grumbled, scanning the chamber for any clues he might have missed. But the room was as silent as before, offering no answers. As he stood there, feeling increasingly overwhelmed, Owen's thoughts drifted back to Pinewood, to his small apartment, his uneventful job, and the simple, predictable life he'd been leading just days ago. It all seemed so far away now, like a dream he couldn't quite remember. And yet, despite the enormity of what lay before him, a small part of Owen couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. For the first time in his life, he was part of something bigger, something extraordinary. He wasn't just Owen Miller, the guy who worked a boring desk job in a sleepy town. He was someone who mattered, someone who could change the course of history. The thought gave him a surge of determination. He couldn't back down now, not when everything was pointing him forward. He had to see this through, no matter how scared or unprepared he felt. Taking a deep breath, Owen walked back toward the entrance of the chamber, his footsteps echoing off the stone floor. He didn't know what awaited him in the trials, or whether he'd succeed or fail, but he did know one thing: there was no turning back. As he stepped out of the chamber and into the dark corridors of the temple, Owen felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but it was one he was meant to take. The ancient prophecy had set the stage, and now it was up to him to play his part. And as Owen ventured deeper into the temple, the mark on his hand glowing faintly in the darkness, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of world would he help create. Chapter 7. The Trials of the Elements. The deeper Owen ventured into the temple, the more the air grew heavy with anticipation. Every step seemed to echo with the weight of the ancient prophecy, each footfall guiding him closer to the unknown. He felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. Part of him wanted to turn back, to return to the safety of his old life, but the pulsing mark on his hand reminded him that there was no going back. The corridor eventually opened up into a circular chamber, its walls covered in the same intricate symbols he'd seen throughout the temple. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, atop which rested four small, intricately carved statues, each representing one of the classical elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Owen approached the pedestal cautiously, his eyes fixed on the statues. They were beautifully crafted, each one radiating a faint glow that seemed to pulse in time with the mark on his hand. As he reached out to touch the first statue, the one representing earth, the ground beneath him trembled slightly, as if responding to his presence. "All right," Owen muttered, swallowing hard. "I guess this is the first trial." Before he could think twice, he grasped the earth statue. The moment his fingers closed around it, the ground beneath him began to shift and rumble, the stones underfoot grinding together as the chamber itself seemed to come alive. The walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering ever so slowly. Panicking, Owen looked around for an escape, but there was none. The chamber was sealed shut. The walls were inching closer, and soon there would be no room left at all. "Think, Owen, think," he muttered frantically. The statue in his hand felt warm, almost vibrating with energy. Desperate, he thrust it into the air, hoping against hope that it would somehow stop the walls from closing in. The earth statue responded instantly. The ground beneath him surged upward, forming a protective barrier around him, and the walls ground to a halt just inches from his face. As the chamber stilled, Owen let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The first trial, it seemed, had been a test of Earth's power, one that he had somehow passed. With the Earth statue still in his hand, he cautiously stepped out of the protective barrier and back toward the pedestal. He placed the statue back in its place, and immediately the chamber began to reset itself, the walls pulling back, the ceiling rising. "Okay," Owen breathed, his heart still racing. "One down, 3 to go." Next was water. Owen reached out and grabbed the second statue. Instantly, the chamber's temperature dropped, and a cold, damp wind swept through the room. Water began to pour in from hidden openings in the walls, quickly flooding the floor. Within moments, the water was up to his knees and rising fast. Owen's mind raced. The earth statue had required him to create a barrier, but what was he supposed to do with water? As the icy liquid crept up to his waist, he felt a tug in his mind, as if the statue itself was urging him to do something. Acting on instinct, Owen closed his eyes and focused on the water around him. Slowly, the water responded to his will, parting in a circle around him and leaving him dry in the center. The water level continued to rise, but it now flowed harmlessly around the edges of the chamber, never touching him. After a few tense moments, the water began to recede, draining away as quickly as it had appeared. When the last drop disappeared, Owen placed the water statue back on the pedestal. He wiped his brow, realizing how exhausting these trials were. He glanced at the remaining two statues, fire and air, and steeled himself for whatever came next. The next trial was fire. Owen grabbed the third statue, bracing for whatever the temple had in store. As he did, the temperature in the chamber spiked, the air shimmering with heat. Flames erupted from the floor, dancing and writhing like living creatures, cutting off any path to safety. Sweat beaded on Owen's forehead as he searched for a solution. He could feel the fire statue vibrating in his hand, almost as if it were alive. His mind raced. If the previous trials had been about protection and control, maybe this one was about harnessing the flames. He closed his eyes and focused on the statue, trying to connect with its energy. He imagined himself becoming one with the fire, mastering it instead of fearing it. To his surprise, the flames began to respond, bending to his will. They twisted and danced around him, forming a protective circle that kept the heat at bay. With a deep breath, Owen directed the fire toward the walls of the chamber, where it burned itself out harmlessly. The room cooled, and the flames subsided. Owen returned the fire statue to the pedestal, breathing a sigh of relief. Just one trial remained: air. Chapter 8: The Shadowy Figure. As Owen prepared himself for the final trial, a cold breeze swept through the chamber, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth and something metallic, almost like blood. He hesitated before reaching for the air statue, a sense of dread washing over him. The previous trials had been terrifying, yes, but this felt different, more ominous, as if something dark was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, Owen mustered his courage and grabbed the air statue. Instantly, the chamber was plunged into darkness. The faint glow from the symbols on the walls disappeared, leaving Owen in complete blackness. The air around him thickened, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. A low, whispering sound filled the space, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. Owen's pulse quickened as he spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound. It wasn't just the wind, there was something else, something that felt distinctly alive. His eyes strained to pierce the darkness, but all he could make out were shifting shadows, moving and swirling like a storm on the horizon. Suddenly, one of the shadows began to take shape, coalescing into a figure draped in a cloak of pure darkness. The whispering grew louder, now unmistakably a voice low and menacing, like the hiss of a snake. The figure seemed to float toward him, its form barely distinguishable from the inky blackness around it. Owen's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that this was no mere hallucination. This was something real, something dangerous. "Who are you?" Owen demanded, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. The figure didn't respond at first, merely hovering a few feet in front of him, its face obscured by the hood of its cloak. When it finally spoke, its voice was a low, raspy whisper that seemed to echo in the depths of Owen's mind. "You have come far, Owen Miller," the figure said, the words chilling him to the bone. "But your journey is not yet complete." Owen swallowed hard, gripping the air statue tightly as he tried to steady his breathing. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating, as if it were sucking all the air out of the room. "I am the guardian of the final trial," it said. "But I am also more than that. I am the shadow that has haunted your dreams, the darkness that lies within you. To succeed in this trial, you must face me and face yourself." Owen's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just a test of his physical abilities or his control over the elements. This was a test of his very soul, a confrontation with the deepest, darkest parts of himself. The figure before him wasn't just a guardian, it was a manifestation of his fears, his doubts, and his insecurities, brought to life by the temple's ancient magic. "I'm not afraid of you," Owen said, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. The figure chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. "We shall see," it said, before lunging at him with a speed and ferocity that took Owen by surprise. Owen barely had time to react. He raised the air statue in a desperate attempt to defend himself, and to his astonishment, a powerful gust of wind erupted from it, pushing the shadowy figure back. But the figure was relentless, recovering almost instantly and attacking again, this time with even more force. Owen was thrown back by the sheer power of the assault, crashing into the stone wall behind him. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to regain his footing, the wind howling around him like a storm. The figure loomed over him, its presence growing darker and more oppressive with each passing moment. "You cannot defeat me," the figure hissed. "I am a part of you. As long as you fear, as long as you doubt, I will always be stronger." Owen's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. The previous trials had required him to harness the power of the elements, to control them rather than be controlled by them. But this was different. This wasn't just about control. This was about acceptance. Taking a deep breath, Owen forced himself to stand, despite the pain. The figure lunged at him again, but this time, instead of fighting back, Owen held out his hand, allowing the shadowy figure to pass through him. As it did, he felt a surge of cold, like ice flowing through his veins, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not perfect," Owen said, his voice stronger now. "I have fears, I have doubts, but that doesn't make me weak, it makes me human." The figure paused, as if considering his words. The wind around them began to die down, and the oppressive darkness started to lift. Owen could feel the power of the air statue pulsing in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a tool and extension of himself. "You are not my enemy," Owen continued, meeting the figure's gaze, though its face remained hidden. "You are a part of me, and I accept that. I accept you." For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the figure began to dissolve, its form dissipating into the air like smoke. The darkness lifted completely, and the chamber was bathed in a soft, gentle light. The oppressive weight that had filled the room was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and clarity. Owen lowered the air statue, his heart still racing but his mind clear. The trial was over. He had faced his own darkness, and he had emerged on the other side stronger for it. As he placed the statue back on the pedestal, the chamber shifted once more, revealing a hidden passage that led deeper into the temple. With a final glance at the now quiet chamber, Owen stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The trials had tested him in ways he never could have imagined, but they had also shown him something important, that the power to change the world didn't just come from strength or knowledge, it came from within. Chapter 9: The Showdown. Owen stepped into the new passageway, his nerves on edge as the air around him grew colder and more oppressive with each step. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch on forever, its walls closing in like a vice. The light from the chamber behind him faded into nothing, leaving him in near complete darkness, save for the faint glow emanating from the mark on his hand. After what felt like an eternity, the passage finally opened up into a vast, cavernous hall. The ceiling soared high above, lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with massive, towering statues of ancient warriors, their stony faces stern and unyielding. At the far end of the hall, a tall, arched doorway stood, flanked by two more statues. But before Owen could take a step toward it, he felt a familiar chill run down his spine. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, and Owen froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The shadow seemed to coalesce and take shape, and within seconds, the dark figure from the temple's trials materialized before him once again. But this time, the figure was different, larger, more menacing, its cloak of darkness swirling around it like a living thing. "You've come far, Owen," the figure said, its voice a low, echoing whisper that reverberated through the hall. "But this is where your journey ends." Owen's fists clenched at his sides. He knew this was the final test, the ultimate showdown between him and the dark force that had haunted his dreams, his thoughts, his very soul. There was no running from it now. He had to face it head on. "I'm not afraid of you," Owen said, though his voice wavered slightly. He took a step forward, refusing to let the fear take hold. The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "You should be," it hissed. "I am the darkness within you, the doubt, the fear, the rage. I am everything you've tried to bury, and now I am here to consume you." Without warning, the figure lunged at Owen, its cloak billowing out like a storm cloud. Owen barely had time to react, raising his arm in a desperate attempt to defend himself. The mark on his hand flared with light, and a shield of pure energy erupted around him, deflecting the shadow's attack. But the figure was relentless. It struck again and again, each blow more powerful than the last. Owen was forced to retreat, his shield flickering under the onslaught. The hall around them seemed to tremble, the statues watching silently as the battle unfolded. "I am stronger than you," the figure taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "You cannot defeat me." Owen's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to hold the shield in place. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. The shadow was too powerful, too overwhelming. But even as the fear threatened to consume him, a new thought emerged, one that cut through the darkness like a blade. The trials hadn't just been about fighting or control. They had been about acceptance, about understanding that true strength came from within, from facing and embracing his own inner darkness. This wasn't a battle he could win by force alone. He had to find another way. Drawing on every ounce of willpower he had left, Owen let the shield drop. The shadow lunged at him, but instead of fighting back, Owen stepped forward, directly into the path of the darkness. The shadow enveloped him, its cold, icy tendrils wrapping around him like chains, trying to drag him down into the abyss. But Owen didn't resist. Instead, he closed his eyes and embraced the darkness, accepting it as part of himself. The fear, the doubt, the rage, they were all pieces of who he was. And just as he had learned in the trials, he didn't need to destroy them. He needed to understand them, to integrate them, to become whole. As he did, something incredible happened. The darkness around him began to dissolve, its icy grip loosening until it vanished entirely. The shadowy figure let out a final, anguished wail before it too disintegrated into nothingness, leaving Owen standing alone in the hall, bathed in the soft glow of his own inner light. He had won not by fighting, but by accepting. The final test was over. The arched doorway at the end of the hall opened with a soft creak, revealing a path that led deeper into the temple. Owen took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and clarity that he had never known before. He had faced his darkest fears and emerged victorious. With renewed resolve, Owen stepped through the doorway, ready to face whatever awaited him on the other side. The true nature of his destiny was still unclear, but for the first time, he felt truly prepared to meet it head-on. Chapter 10. The Sacrifice. The passage beyond the doorway was narrow, the walls lined with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with a blue-green light. Owen walked cautiously, his steps echoing softly in the still air. His recent victory over the shadowy figure had left him physically and emotionally drained, but the sight of the passage ahead renewed his determination. He had come too far to falter now. As he continued, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, its size and grandeur breathtaking. At the center of the chamber stood a raised stone platform, surrounded by a deep, shimmering pool of water. The air was filled with a soft, melodic hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Above, a series of ancient symbols floated lazily, glowing with an ethereal light. On the platform lay a single, ornate chest, adorned with intricate designs and glowing runes. Owen approached it slowly, feeling an inexplicable sense of reverence. As he reached the chest, he noticed a pedestal beside it, upon which rested a large, weathered book bound in dark leather. The book's cover was embossed with the same runes that adorned the chest. His curiosity piqued, Owen picked up the book and opened it. The pages were filled with more symbols and cryptic writing, but at the center of the book, an elaborate drawing of the chest was accompanied by a description in an ancient script. Though he couldn't fully understand the text, the drawings were clear. The chest was not merely a treasure, it was a vessel for something incredibly powerful, something that required a great sacrifice to unlock. A cold shiver ran down Owen's spine as he read the final passage, which spoke of a great price that must be paid to obtain the chest's secrets. The words were vague, but the meaning was unmistakable. Unlocking the chest's power required a sacrifice of profound significance. He set the book aside and approached the chest. His hand trembled slightly as he placed it on the lid, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. With a deep breath, Owen opened the chest, expecting to find gold or precious artifacts. Instead, the chest was empty except for a small, intricately carved box resting at the bottom. Owen lifted the box carefully, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he opened it, a brilliant light burst forth, filling the chamber with an intense, radiant glow. Within the box was a crystal, larger than any Owen had ever seen. Its surface was smooth and polished, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. As he reached out to touch it, the chamber's lights flickered and dimmed, and the melodic hum grew louder, more urgent. A figure materialized before him, ethereal and shimmering, its form both beautiful and terrifying. It was a guardian spirit, its eyes glowing with ancient wisdom. "Welcome, chosen one," the spirit's voice echoed through the chamber, both soothing and commanding. "You have completed the trials and proven your worth, but now comes the final test, the sacrifice." Owen's heart raced as he faced the spirit. "Sacrifice?" he repeated, dread seeping into his voice. "What do you mean?" The spirit's gaze was unwavering. "The crystal is a source of great power, capable of reshaping the world. To wield it, you must offer something of equal value. The cost is a personal sacrifice, something deeply meaningful to you." Owen's mind raced. What could he possibly sacrifice? The idea of giving up something significant was both terrifying and confusing. The apartment he'd lived in, the simple life he'd left behind, but none of those things felt truly significant in the way the spirit was describing. Suddenly, a painful realization struck him. His journey had already cost him a great deal: his sense of normalcy, his safety, his sense of self. But there was one thing that had always been his guiding light, something he cherished deeply: his family. His thoughts turned to his parents, his siblings, the people who had always been there for him. The thought of sacrificing his connection to them was unbearable. It was that the future of the world might hinge on this very moment. "I understand," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll do it." The spirit nodded solemnly. "Your sacrifice will not go unnoticed. The crystal's power will reshape the world, but its effects will ripple far beyond what you can imagine." The chamber grew silent, the weight of Owen's decision settling heavily on his shoulders. As he placed the crystal back into the box, he felt a profound sense of loss mixed with hope. He was about to make a choice that would forever alter the course of his life and the lives of countless others. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and consequences. But he had come this far, and he would see it through to the end. The spirit vanished, and the chamber's lights returned to their gentle glow. The pool of water shimmered, and the melodic hum resumed, carrying with it a sense of solemnity and promise. Owen stepped away from the chest and the pedestal, his mind still grappling with the enormity of his sacrifice. He knew that whatever happened next, he would face it with the strength and courage he had discovered within himself. The final stage of his journey awaited, and he was ready to embrace it, no matter what the future held. Chapter 11. The Unveiling. The journey through the ancient temple had left Owen both physically and emotionally drained. As he emerged from the chamber, he felt the weight of his sacrifice settle heavily on his shoulders. The crystal he had left behind would have immense power, but its potential was now tied to a profound choice he had made. The passageway led him to an expansive cavern, illuminated by a soft, ambient light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The cavern's walls were adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes of great change, heroes, battles, and symbols of transformation. At the center of the cavern stood a grand altar, bathed in a radiant golden light. On the altar rested a large ancient book, its cover bearing a symbol that matched the mark on Owen's hand. As Owen approached the altar, he could feel a palpable sense of energy in the air. The light from the book seemed to call to him, its glow reflecting in his eyes and casting long, shifting shadows on the cavern walls. He reached out and touched the book, feeling its warmth through the old leather cover. With a deep breath, Owen opened the book. The pages were filled with more symbols and text, but this time, the writing seemed to resonate with him on a deeper level. As he scanned the pages, a sense of clarity began to wash over him. The text spoke of an ancient prophecy and the role of the chosen one in reshaping the world. It detailed how the crystal, which Owen had left behind, was the key to unlocking a new era of enlightenment and peace. The final pages of the book were a revelation. They described the process of activating the crystal and the sacrifice required to do so. Owen read with growing awe as he realized the gravity of what he had done. The prophecy was clear. By sacrificing something of immense personal value, Owen had unlocked the crystal's true potential. It was not just a tool of power but a beacon of hope for the future. As he read further, Owen came across a section detailing the consequences of using the crystal. It was said that while the crystal had the power to reshape the world, it would also bring about significant change and upheaval. The world would be transformed, but the process would not be without its challenges. The prophecy spoke of a new world emerging from the ashes of the old, one that would require vision, leadership, and courage to navigate. Feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Owen closed the book and took a moment to reflect. His sacrifice had been a significant one, but it was clear that the path ahead would be just as demanding. The crystal's power was immense, and he would need to be prepared for the trials that lay ahead. With newfound determination, Owen left the cavern and made his way back through the temple. The journey had been long and arduous, but he had come to understand the true nature of his role. He was not merely a participant in the prophecy. He was a catalyst for change, a bridge between the past and the future. As he emerged from the temple, the world outside felt both familiar and strange. The landscape had changed, subtly altered by the power of the crystal and the sacrifice he had made. The sky was a deeper shade of blue, the air felt lighter, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Owen knew that his journey was far from over. The prophecy had set him on a path that would shape the destiny of the world. and he had to be ready to guide it through the challenges that lay ahead. The crystal's power was now a part of him, and with it came both responsibility and hope. As he took his first steps into this new world, Owen felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced his fears, made his sacrifice, and uncovered the truth of the prophecy. Now, it was time to lead, to inspire, and to ensure that the new era he had helped bring about would be one of light and hope for all. Chapter 12. The New Reality. Emerging from the ancient temple was like stepping into a world painted with a fresh, surreal brushstroke. Owen squinted against the newfound brightness of the sky, which now shimmered in shades of gold and azure. The once familiar landscape had morphed into something almost whimsical. Trees looked as though they had been borrowed from a child's drawing, vividly colored and curiously shaped, with leaves that fluttered like confetti in the breeze. Owen rubbed his eyes, thinking it might be a trick of the light or perhaps he was still dreaming. But no, the world had indeed changed. A squirrel, sporting what looked like an acorn helmet, scampered across his path. It paused, giving Owen a rather judgmental stare before continuing on its way. Owen wondered if the squirrel had undergone a transformation as well or if he had simply been in the temple too long. He decided to get his bearings and started walking, taking in the peculiar sights and sounds. The once mundane town of Pinewood was now vibrant and eccentric. Buildings had taken on fantastical designs. One house had a roof shaped like a giant mushroom, while another appeared to be constructed from what seemed to be giant, stacked jelly beans. As Owen strolled through the town square, he noticed that the usual hustle and bustle had been replaced by a more leisurely pace. People were milling about, engaging in peculiar activities. A group of elderly ladies were having a heated debate over which flavor of cloud was best, while a street performer juggled flaming torches that inexplicably turned into butterflies mid-air. Owen approached a small cafe that seemed to be serving an array of colorful pastries and drinks. The cafe's sign read "The Whimsical Brew," which seemed like an understatement given the giant teapot that poured steaming tea into a fountain below. He ventured inside, hoping to get some answers. "Welcome to the Whimsical Brew," chirped the barista, who was wearing an apron adorned with dancing teacups. "What can I get for you? We have a lovely assortment of rainbow lattes, moonbeam macaroons, and our special, the Nebula smoothie." Owen blinked. I'll just have a regular coffee, please. I think I need something to ground me." The barista looked slightly disappointed, but nodded and went to prepare Owen's drink. Owen took a seat at a table where a chair, which seemed to have a life of its own, wobbled over to him and nudged him gently. "So, what's with all the changes?" Owen asked the barista when the coffee finally arrived, which, amusingly, came in a cup shaped like a miniature rocket. The barista smiled serenely. "Oh, you must be new to the post-crystal world. After the great unveiling, everything's been a bit, how should I put it, adjusted. The crystal didn't just bring about change, it made things a bit more interesting." Owen took a cautious sip of his rocket-shaped coffee. To his surprise, it tasted remarkably good. "Interesting?" he echoed. "Yes, indeed," the barista said, handing him a tiny, sparkling napkin. "You see, the crystal's power didn't just alter the physical world, it also infused it with a bit of whimsy and unpredictability. The new reality is designed to encourage creativity, imagination, and, let's face it, some good laughs." Owen raised an eyebrow. "So, this is all part of the new world's charm." "Exactly," the barista replied. "The idea is to make life a little more colorful and a lot more fun. After all, who wants to live in a world where everything is predictable and mundane?" Owen chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "Well, I have to admit, it's definitely unique." As he finished his coffee, Owen couldn't help but notice the peculiarities around him. The giant mushrooms with people playing hopscotch on their caps, the floating market stalls where items hovered just out of reach, and the peculiar but cheerful inhabitants. It was clear that the new world was as vibrant and unpredictable as the crystal's power had promised. With a newfound sense of purpose, Owen decided to embrace this whimsical reality. After all, if the world was going to be this colorful and peculiar, he might as well enjoy the ride. And who knew, amidst the chaos and comedy, there might just be the opportunity to lead and inspire in ways he had never imagined. As he stepped out of the caf and into the newly transformed Pinewood, Owen took a deep breath and smiled. The future was uncertain, but it was also brimming with potential. With a wink to a passing cloud that seemed to wink back, Owen set out to navigate this new, enchanting world, ready for whatever surprises lay ahead. Chapter 13. The Consequences. The whimsical charm of the newly transformed world began to wear thin as Owen faced the stark reality of its impact. While initially enchanting, soon revealed deeper, unforeseen consequences. Pinewood's transformation was not merely a superficial change. It had altered the very fabric of daily life. Owen walked through the town square, now more observant of the effects the crystal's power had on its inhabitants. People were struggling to adapt. The once familiar routines had been disrupted by the unpredictable and whimsical elements now woven into their lives. Streets twisted into impossible shapes, and objects floated or changed colors without warning. In the town hall, Owen found Mayor Thompson surrounded by a group of frantic citizens. The mayor's normally composed demeanor was replaced by a look of exasperation. He was attempting to calm a crowd that was becoming increasingly restless as floating furniture spun in erratic patterns overhead. "Thank you for coming, Owen," Mayor Thompson said, his voice tinged with frustration. "As you can see, the new reality is causing quite a bit of chaos. We're trying to keep things under control, but it's like trying to herd cats." Owen nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I see that. It's more than just a bit of whimsy. It's affecting everyone's ability to function normally." The mayor sighed. "Exactly. The crystal's power has brought about a fundamental shift in reality, and while it has its charms, it has also made things incredibly difficult. People are struggling to adapt to the changes, and we need to find a way to stabilize things." Owen's thoughts turned to the ancient book he had found in the temple. It had mentioned that the new world would come with challenges and upheaval. He hadn't fully grasped the implications until now. The crystal had indeed fulfilled its promise of transformation, but it had also left behind a trail of complications. As he walked through the town, Owen noticed that not everyone was coping poorly. A few residents had embraced the new reality with surprising enthusiasm. A street artist was painting murals that changed color in response to the light, creating ever-shifting works of art. A group of children were playing a game of hopscotch on the caps of giant mushrooms, their laughter echoing through the streets. But for many, the changes were overwhelming. Owen saw people struggling with everyday tasks that had become bizarre and unpredictable. A baker was trying to manage a bakery where the bread dough levitated and changed flavor randomly, while a librarian was sorting books that floated and rearranged themselves. Realizing that the new reality needed more than just adjustment, it needed understanding and guidance, Owen decided to address the town. He gathered the residents in the town square, where the whimsical elements had momentarily settled into a gentle, if unpredictable, pattern. "Everyone," Owen began, his voice carrying over the crowd, "I know the changes we're experiencing are overwhelming. The new reality we've been given is vibrant and full of potential, but it's also chaotic and unpredictable." He paused, gauging the reactions of the crowd. Many looked weary but hopeful. "We need to approach this as an opportunity to adapt and innovate. Yes, it's challenging, but we can work together to find balance. We can harness the whimsy and creativity of this new world to build something positive." The crowd murmured in agreement, a sense of solidarity beginning to form. Owen continued, "We'll need to be patient and creative. Let's collaborate to find solutions, adapt our routines, and make the most of the unique elements around us. Together, we can turn this chaotic change into a source of strength and inspiration." As he concluded his speech, the mood in the town square shifted from one of frustration to one of cautious optimism. The residents, though still adjusting, were beginning to see the potential in their transformed world. With Owen's guidance, they were ready to face the challenges head-on and shape the new reality into something they could all embrace. Chapter 14. The Awakening. The weeks following Owen's speech brought about a gradual but noticeable shift in Pinewood. The town, once fraught with confusion and chaos, was beginning to adjust to its new reality. The whimsical elements that had initially disrupted daily life were now being embraced as a part of the town's unique charm. One crisp morning, as Owen walked through the town square, he noticed a change in the air, a sense of excitement and curiosity that hadn't been there before. The townspeople, inspired by Owen's call to adapt and innovate, had started exploring the peculiarities of their transformed world with renewed enthusiasm. A group of residents had set up an open-air market where stalls floated gently in the air, their vendors offering a range of bizarre and delightful items. Owen watched with a smile as a customer eagerly purchased a pair of shoes that changed colors based on the wearer's mood. Nearby, a street artist was creating a mural that seemed to come alive with each brushstroke, displaying scenes of magical landscapes and fantastical creatures. In the town square, a crowd had gathered around a new installation, a series of interactive sculptures that responded to touch and sound. As people engaged with the art, it transformed into different shapes and patterns, eliciting laughter and awe from the audience. Amidst this vibrant scene, Owen noticed a young girl standing alone, gazing intently at the sky. Her name was Lily, a bright and imaginative child who had always been fascinated by the whimsical changes in Pinewood. Owen approached her, intrigued by her intense focus. "Hi, Lily," Owen said, crouching beside her. "What are you looking at?" Lily pointed to a formation of clouds that had taken on the shape of a dragon, its scales shimmering with a spectrum of colors. "I think the clouds are trying to tell us something," she said with a serious expression. Owen followed her gaze and saw that the clouds were indeed forming intricate patterns, almost like a story being told in the sky. He couldn't help but be reminded of the ancient prophecy he had read, the idea that the new world was a canvas for imagination and creativity. As they watched, the dragon-shaped clouds shifted, revealing a series of symbols that appeared to be a message. The symbols were similar to those Owen had seen in the ancient book, but they were more abstract and fluid. "Do you think it means something?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Owen nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. The world is full of new and unexpected things. Maybe this is just another part of the awakening process." Word of the mysterious cloud symbols quickly spread through the town, and soon, more people began to notice the patterns appearing in the sky. The symbols seemed to shift and evolve, forming new messages that sparked curiosity and excitement among the residents. As the days passed, Owen realized that the new world was not just a place of whimsical chaos, but a realm of possibilities and discovery. The awakening was not limited to the changes in Pinewood. It was a broader phenomenon affecting people everywhere. The whimsical elements and the mysterious symbols in the sky were just the beginning. The town began organizing gatherings and discussions to interpret the symbols and explore their meanings. There was a renewed sense of community as people came together to decode the messages and uncover the mysteries of their new reality. The once fractured town was now united in its quest to understand and harness the magic around them. Owen stood on the edge of the town square, watching the vibrant scene unfold before him. The awakening was more than just a change in the world. It was a transformation of the people themselves. They were learning to embrace the unknown, finding joy in the unpredictable, and discovering new ways to connect and create. As the sun set and the sky lit up with a myriad of colors, Owen felt a surge of hope and excitement. The world was awakening, and with it, the potential for something extraordinary was unfolding. He knew that the journey was far from over, but with the spirit of curiosity and unity guiding them, Pinewood and the world was ready to embrace the adventure that lay ahead. Chapter 15. The Movement. Pinewood's transformation into a whimsical wonderland had sparked a wave of inspiration and creativity that reached far beyond the town's borders. What began as a localized phenomenon had ignited a global movement, fueled by the shared sense of wonder and possibility that the new world had fostered. In a makeshift headquarters within the town square, Owen and a group of enthusiastic residents gathered around a large, colorful map of the world. The map was dotted with pins and markers, representing various locations where similar changes had occurred. It was clear that the whimsical transformation was not confined to Pinewood. It was a global phenomenon. "Look at this," said Emily, a former schoolteacher turned community organizer. She pointed to a cluster of pins in South America. "We've been receiving reports from places like Brazil and Argentina where the changes are even more dramatic. It's like the whole world is joining in this movement." Owen nodded, feeling a mix of pride and awe. "It's incredible. The crystal's power has not only changed our town but has also inspired people everywhere to embrace creativity and innovation." The room buzzed with excitement as people discussed the implications of the global movement. The idea of a world united by a shared sense of wonder was both thrilling and daunting. The challenges of managing such a vast and diverse transformation were significant, but the potential was equally immense. A young man named Raj, who had been leading efforts to communicate with other affected areas, spoke up. "We've started organizing online forums and virtual meetups where people from different regions can share their experiences and ideas. It's amazing to see how everyone is coming together to support one another and explore the possibilities of this new reality." As the conversation continued, Owen's thoughts turned to the practical aspects of the movement. The whimsical elements of the new world presented unique challenges. Everything from floating markets to unpredictable weather patterns required innovative solutions. "We need to focus on creating frameworks for collaboration and problem solving," Owen suggested. "We should encourage people to form local councils or groups to address specific issues and share their solutions with the broader community." The room agreed, and plans were set in motion to establish communication networks and support systems. The movement was not just about embracing the new world, but also about navigating its complexities together. It was a call to action for everyone to contribute their skills, ideas, and creativity to build a better, more connected world. In the days that followed, the movement gained momentum. Across the globe, people began forming local groups to tackle the challenges of their transformed environments. They shared their successes and setbacks, learning from one another and adapting their approaches. The online forums became a hub of activity, with discussions ranging from practical solutions to philosophical reflections on the nature of their new reality. Owen continued to be an active participant in the movement, traveling to various locations and participating in virtual meetings. He was struck by the diversity of ideas and the spirit of collaboration that characterized the global effort. Each region had its own unique way of interpreting and embracing the whimsical changes, but the underlying message was the same. Together, they could turn the challenges of the new world into opportunities for growth and innovation. One evening, as Owen reviewed messages and updates from around the world, he received a video message from Lily, the young girl who had noticed the cloud symbols. Her face was beaming with excitement as she spoke. "Mr. Owen," she said, "I've been working on a project with some friends to create a map of the new world's whimsical elements. We've included everything we've learned so far and are sharing it with other kids. It's so much fun." Owen smiled, touched by the enthusiasm of the younger generation. The movement was not just about adults finding solutions, but also about inspiring creativity and imagination in people of all ages. The future was being shaped by a collective effort, and it was clear that the spirit of the movement was resonating with everyone. As he prepared to address the global network once more, Owen felt a deep sense of optimism. The world was in the midst of an extraordinary transformation, and the movement was a testament to the power of unity and imagination. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with the global community coming together to embrace the new reality, there was no limit to what they could achieve. Chapter 16. The future. The global movement had gained impressive traction, uniting people from all corners of the world in their shared quest to adapt and thrive in the whimsical new reality. Yet, as Owen surveyed the expansive reach of the movement, he couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty about the future. The potential for creativity and collaboration was boundless, but so were the challenges that lay ahead. Owen sat in a virtual conference room, surrounded by representatives from various regions who had joined the call to discuss the next steps. The screen was filled with faces from different backgrounds and time zones, each contributing their perspective on how to navigate the evolving landscape. "I think we need to start thinking long-term," said Raj, who had become a key figure in organizing the movement's logistics. "We've successfully adapted to the initial changes, but what about the future? How do we ensure that the whimsical elements continue to enhance our lives rather than complicate them?" Emily chimed in. "We need to develop strategies for sustainability. For instance, how can we ensure that the floating markets and interactive art installations are not only enjoyable, but also practical for everyday use?" As the discussion progressed, it became clear that the focus needed to shift from immediate adaptation to long-term planning. The whimsical elements, while delightful, required careful management to maintain balance and functionality. Owen raised a hand to speak. "I agree that we need sustainable solutions, but we should also consider how to integrate the creativity and spontaneity of the new world into our plans. We have an opportunity to build a future that is not just practical but also inspiring." The representatives nodded in agreement, and the conversation turned to ways of incorporating creativity into everyday life. They discussed potential initiatives such as community innovation hubs, where people could collaborate on new ideas and projects, and educational programs that would help people of all ages harness their creative potential. "We should also think about how to preserve the unique qualities of our transformed world," suggested one participant from Japan. "The whimsical elements are part of our identity now, and we should find ways to celebrate and incorporate them into our cultural practices." The meeting concluded with a renewed sense of purpose. The future of the movement was not just about managing change, but also about celebrating it. The global community would work together to create a world where the whimsical and the practical could coexist harmoniously. As the virtual conference ended, Owen reflected on the journey ahead. The movement had achieved remarkable success, but the true test lay in how it would shape the future. He realized that the key to a thriving future was not just in adapting to change, but in embracing it as an integral part of their lives. The following weeks were filled with activity as local groups began implementing their new initiatives. In Pinewood, Owen saw the fruits of their collective efforts. Floating gardens where people could grow their own food, creative workshops where artists collaborated on new projects, and educational centers where children learned to blend imagination with practical skills. Owen visited one such workshop, where a group of children was experimenting with new forms of art using the whimsical elements of their world. The room was filled with laughter and creativity as the children used floating paintbrushes and color-changing canvases to create their masterpieces. "Look, Mr. Owen," Lily exclaimed, showing him a painting that shifted and danced with the light. "We're making art that changes with the world." Owen smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The future was unfolding in unexpected ways, but it was clear that the new reality was not only manageable but also full of potential. The whimsical elements were no longer just a challenge. They were a source of inspiration and creativity. As Owen looked around at the vibrant and dynamic world that was emerging, he felt hopeful and excited. The global movement had laid the foundation for a future where imagination and practicality could thrive together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with the spirit of innovation and collaboration guiding them, the future held endless possibilities. As the virtual conference ended, Owen reflected on the journey ahead. The movement had achieved remarkable success, but the true test lay in how it would shape the future. He realized that the key to a thriving future was not just in adapting to change, but in embracing it as an integral part of their lives. The following weeks were filled with activity as local groups began implementing their new initiatives. In Pinewood, Owen saw the fruits of their collective efforts. Floating gardens where people could grow their own food, creative workshops where artists collaborated on new projects, and educational centers where children learned to blend imagination with practical skills. Owen visited one such workshop, where a group of children was experimenting with new forms of art using the whimsical elements of their world. The room was filled with laughter and creativity as the children used floating paintbrushes and color-changing canvases to create their masterpieces. "Look, Mr. Owen," Lily exclaimed, showing him a painting that shifted and danced with the light. "We're making art that changes with the world." Owen smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The future was unfolding in unexpected ways, but it was clear that the new reality was not only manageable but also full of potential. The whimsical elements were no longer just a challenge. They were a source of inspiration and creativity. As Owen looked around at the vibrant and dynamic world that was emerging, he felt hopeful and excited. The global movement had laid the foundation for a future where imagination and practicality could thrive together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with the spirit of innovation and collaboration guiding them, the future held endless possibilities. Chapter 17. The Final Message. The global movement had matured into a thriving network of creativity and collaboration, yet the enigmatic symbols that had appeared in the sky still held their secrets. The shifting clouds, once a source of wonder, had become a persistent puzzle for those seeking to understand the full scope of the new reality. As Owen prepared for another virtual conference, the tension was palpable. Everyone was eager to unravel the final message the symbols seemed to convey. In the town square of Pinewood, a grand setup had been arranged for the occasion. A large screen had been erected, displaying the latest patterns forming in the sky. The global representatives and curious citizens gathered around, their faces illuminated by the ethereal glow of the symbols. Owen addressed the crowd from the central platform, his voice echoing with both anticipation and a touch of nervousness. "Thank you all for coming. We've seen how the symbols in the sky have evolved over time, and today we hope to uncover their final message." The crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes fixed on the shifting patterns above. The symbols, which had once appeared random and whimsical, now seemed to be forming coherent shapes and sequences. Owen had worked with experts in symbolism and linguistics to analyze the patterns, but the final message had remained elusive. As the symbols coalesced into a more defined form, Owen felt a surge of excitement. The patterns began to reveal intricate designs, a series of interconnected triangles and circles that seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy. There was an undeniable sense that the symbols were leading to something significant. Suddenly, the shapes began to form recognizable figures. A familiar image emerged, a large, glowing eye at the center of a radiant sun, surrounded by concentric circles and flowing lines. The sight was both mesmerizing and unnerving. One of the representatives, Dr. Amina, a renowned expert in ancient languages, spoke up. "This symbol resembles the ancient representation of knowledge and enlightenment. It seems to suggest that the final message is about understanding and enlightenment." Owen nodded. "Yes, it appears to be a call to seek deeper knowledge and wisdom. The transformation we've experienced is not just about adapting to a new world but also about understanding the essence of this new reality. The symbols continue to evolve, revealing a sequence of words and phrases. The final message appeared to be a directive: embrace the unknown, seek wisdom in chaos. Together, we create the future. The crowd reacted with a mix of awe and contemplation. The message seemed to encapsulate the journey. They had all been on a journey of embracing uncertainty, finding meaning amidst chaos, and working together to shape a new future. Owen addressed the crowd once more. This message reaffirms what we've learned throughout this transformation. The whimsical changes and challenges we've faced are not just obstacles. They are opportunities for growth and enlightenment. We must continue to embrace the unknown and seek wisdom in our experiences. As the crowd absorbed the final message, a sense of unity and purpose filled the air. The symbols had served as a reminder of the journey they had undertaken and the collective effort required to navigate the new reality. The virtual conference concluded with a sense of accomplishment and renewed determination. The global movement had not only adapted to the whimsical changes, but had also embraced the deeper meaning behind them. The final message was a testament to their resilience and creativity. In the weeks that followed, Owen and the global community focused on translating the message into action. They continued to explore and innovate, guided by the principles of embracing uncertainty and seeking wisdom. The whimsical world they inhabited was no longer just a setting. It was a canvas for continuous growth and exploration. Owen stood in the town square, watching as the community continued to thrive and evolve. The final message had provided clarity and direction, reinforcing the idea that the journey was far from over. The future remained uncertain, but with the spirit of unity and discovery, they were ready to face whatever came next. The sky above Pinewood was filled with shifting patterns, each a reminder of the journey they had undertaken and the promise of new adventures yet to come. With a deep sense of fulfillment and excitement, Owen looked forward to the future, confident that the lessons learned and the community forged would guide them through the ever-changing landscape of their new world. Chapter 18: The Call to Action. As the world continued to adjust to the whimsical reality, the final message had become a guiding principle for many. Yet, beneath the surface of this new, vibrant existence, a lingering sense of mystery remained. The global movement was thriving, but the shifting symbols in the sky had left an unresolved enigma that gnawed at Owen and the rest of the community. The day after the final message was revealed, Owen received an unexpected message from an anonymous source. The message was brief but intriguing. The final revelation is closer than you think. Look beyond the symbols. Confused but intrigued, Owen gathered his team of advisors and representatives from the global movement for an emergency meeting. They reviewed the symbols and the final message once more, searching for any overlooked details. This anonymous message seems to suggest there's more to uncover, Raj said, scratching his head. We've analyzed every aspect of the symbols, but there's still a sense of something hidden. Emily nodded in agreement. We might have missed something. Maybe the symbols have layers of meaning that we haven't yet explored. Determined to solve the mystery, Owen decided to revisit the place where it all began, the temple in Pinewood. The temple had been largely forgotten in the wake of the global changes, but it held the key to the initial transformation. Accompanied by a small team of trusted friends, Owen made his way to the temple, which had now taken on a surreal, otherworldly appearance. The walls shimmered with an ethereal light, and the air crackled with an electric energy. Inside, the ancient symbols and carvings seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy. Let's start by examining the symbols more closely, Owen suggested. They began to study the carvings with renewed focus, looking for any signs or patterns that might provide further insight. As they examined the intricate designs, Owen noticed something peculiar. A series of carvings appeared to be slightly different from the rest. They seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. He pointed this out to the team. Look at these, Owen said. They don't stay static. They seem to move. The team observed the carvings and realized that they were indeed shifting in subtle ways. As they followed the shifting patterns, A hidden passage began to reveal itself behind a previously unnoticed panel. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, Owen and his team entered the hidden passage. It led to a small, dimly lit chamber with a single pedestal at its center. On the pedestal rested an ancient scroll, its surface inscribed with more symbols. Owen carefully unrolled the scroll. The symbols were intricate and unfamiliar, but they seemed to radiate a sense of urgency. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that the scroll contained a message written in an ancient, enigmatic script. "This might be the final revelation," Owen said, his voice tinged with awe. "But we'll need to decipher it to understand its meaning." As they worked to translate the scroll, the chamber around them seemed to hum with an almost sentient energy. The air grew thick with anticipation as the team decoded the final message. It was a warning and a challenge. "Beware the path of illusion. Seek the truth within the chaos, for the true test lies ahead. Only through unity and wisdom will you uncover the final truth." Owen and his team exchanged concerned glances. The message suggested that while they had made significant progress, there was still a deeper truth to uncover. The whimsical changes and the enigmatic symbols were part of a larger puzzle that remained unresolved. As they left the temple, Owen felt a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. The final revelation had not provided all the answers, but had set the stage for a new journey. The path ahead was shrouded in mystery, and the true test lay in navigating the illusions and seeking the truth. The global movement continued to thrive, but with the knowledge of the final message, there was an added layer of purpose and urgency. Owen and his team knew that their journey was far from over, and the real challenge was yet to come. The sky above Pinewood continued to shift with patterns and symbols, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay beyond the whimsical changes. As Owen looked up at the ever-changing sky, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The final truth awaited, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead with unity, wisdom, and a spirit of discovery.